What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Fringe. I know we're still talking about Alberta independence, but some things have changed. Some more clarity has come our way in our Alberta is Leaving series here on the channel. It's time for me to kind of educate again for anybody who is on the fence. I've seen a lot of people asking questions. What happens to our old age security? What happens to Canada Pension Plan? What happens to passports, our banks? Many other questions. Now, I have reached out to Alberta Prosperity Project, and I am hopefully going to have their organizers on the channel shortly to talk about everyone's concerns, about maybe some things that people aren't really aware of. And this is to all educate before a question is formed on a ballot, so that anybody who isn't understanding what is happening in Alberta right now, or what the consequences of such a vote would do to Albertans, is the purpose of this series. I want to make sure people are very well versed, or any of those who are sitting on the fence know exactly what they're getting into and having their questions answered. With that said, ladies and gents, let's get into some of the information that's now come forward. Bruce Arthur posting this tweet saying, off of the Alberta Prosperity Project, saying, "Boy, does this sound like the lies of Brexit. Ain't no Canadian government agreeing to Canada Pension Plan, an old age security, citizenship, or a passport if Alberta separates. Zero chance, total fantasy." Of course, what Alberta Prosperity Project tweeted out was, "Sovereignty doesn't mean losing what matters. You keep your identity, pension, passport, and gain a hopeful future." Of course, they talk about your old age security and pension, Canadian citizenship, hope for the future, Canadian passport, personal identity. That's what Bruce Arthur's talking about, is that it's all just lies. Of course, Jeffrey Rath chimed in. Now, I've always said Jeffrey Rath is an amazing constitutional lawyer. He does very good at this. I don't know about the public speaking end of things. Again, I think that Alberta Prosperity Project, or the APP, needs to find a better spokesperson. Again, I've said personally, I think Keith Wilson should take charge on that front. We'll see how things develop down the line. But Jeffrey Rath coming in, under Canadian law, Albertans would not lose their Canadian citizenship. Carney has 4 passports. Mike Myers has 3. Again, I mentioned this when I talked about my own father. He migrated from Scotland. He kept a British passport until the early to mid 2000s, at which time he decided he wanted to become a full Canadian citizen and carry a Canadian passport. It says Canada Pension Plan is legally owed to everyone who paid into it. Doesn't matter if you're in Costa Rica or Alberta. Stop lying. #Alberta Independence. So, of course, one of the replies says, "Ain't no Canadian passports or benefits going to be given to a bunch of separatist traitors." He says, "Cool, 30% tariffs on container goods going to Ontario from BC. It is." Now, of course, that's just a snide comment, but Stephanie kind of chimes in here. Correct. When a Canadian retires and decides to live in another country, one still collects Canada Pension Plan, old age security, also with a reduction. GIS would also not be paid if one collected while living in Canada. But if Alberta and Saskatchewan become an independent sovereign state, the money saved would be more than enough to cover any difference. They would not leave their retirees out in the cold. I think that's an important statement because, again, as you can see from these posts, these are the things I'm talking about in previous videos when I mentioned that Ezra Levant had stated at a town hall that when he was working under Preston Manning and Quebec was talking about separation in the 90s, their people had essentially a French version of an encyclopedia that answered all of these questions, that made these things clear. I think under the time restraints that we have in order to get a ballot on a question, that's why series like this are so important, because they're answering people's questions to make their decision more clear so that people understand the weight of their vote, what reasons they would want to stay, what reasons they would want to potentially leave. Alberta Prosperity has made it simpler. Here's an updated version of the Alberta separation for dummies. Now, they've put this out, and I do have it blown up for you guys. Let's take a look at that again, forgive the way it's sitting on the screen. I had to zoom into it in order to get all of the text. But this is put out by the Alberta Prosperity Project. Now it does say, oh, sorry, I forgot I have to go this way when going through it. You can see, or you can't see at the top. It does say it's updated version 2.0. But let's get into what is in this document. So it says the original version of this had a lot of inaccuracies and misinformation. This version debunks those inaccuracies using the Clarity Act that provides a clear path for separation. So here's number one, the referendum. In order for any movement towards separation to happen, a referendum must be held in Alberta. In that referendum, a clear majority must be in approval. The threshold for a referendum passing should be 60% of those who vote in the referendum, as it would meet the SCC test of a clear majority or a clear win. That, hey, people were very upfront that this is what they want. Now, Alberta's currently sitting, according to a new poll, at 45% of Albertans that are, without question, ready to put yes on that ballot. The hill to climb to get to that other 15% is going to be major. And again, that's the reason I know a lot of people sometimes get tired of us talking about these things on the channel, but it's not just Alberta here. This affects the rest of Canada. It's going to affect Canada's GDP. It's going to affect our country as a whole. It's important to talk about these things because this is where these documents start to make things a little more clear for Albertans who are fed up with the government suppression, with the boot on their neck. Many people would ask the question, well, if these are the realities, why do we stay? Part two here, and this is where, again, it comes down to people saying, well, the Indigenous have rights, this Indigenous land, you're taking it from First Nations people. No. On the negotiations end, it says no party to secession negotiations has a veto. Feds, all provinces, and impacted First Nations are under a legal duty to enter into good faith negotiations as for the terms of separation. So again, they don't get a veto. We've talked about this on other videos. Again, this is just making it very clear so people understand these are the laws, and this is based on the Clarity Act. Now, you have First Nations chiefs that are saying they're going to go to court. They're going to challenge the Clarity Act. It's really just a waste of time. And again, I've shown in other videos how those chiefs are funded by, we'll say, special interest groups. When it comes to land transfers, and this is a big one that some people had concern about, the only federal crown lands are 4 national parks, 3 military bases, which is Suffield, Wainwright, and Cold Lake, and the 140 reserves, which is only 1.2% of Alberta's land base. Everything else is Alberta Crown land, so almost all of the land in Alberta is already legally Alberta's. Again, this is based on the Clarity Act. This is 100% accuracy. For anybody who says, no, it belongs to these people, it belongs to that. No, this is, you can read the treaties. I've covered it in other videos with Corey Morgan about how the First Nations are misleading information by special interest groups to say, nope, it's ours to make the decisions with. We're going to veto. We're not going to allow it to happen. This is what we think your treaties. As Corey Morgan says, these treaties are available online and they're very easy reads. They're not complicated. One of the things people ask about is the lost jobs. Soldiers could be given the option of switching to Alberta's military or moving out of Alberta to remain in Canadian military. The same with RCMP if Alberta hasn't already switched to a provincial police force. And a lot of people bring up the question of, well, if we didn't have a provincial police force by this time, if we didn't have a military, how will Alberta be protected? There are a multitude of scenarios in which Alberta could put through a deal with the United States. The United States could recognize Alberta's independence and offer military support. There's a multitude of solutions to that, but this is the outline of what happens in Canada. Number 5, the landlocked argument. Alberta is currently landlocked by federal policy. However, bills C-69, 45, and let me zoom in for this one. I'm sorry you guys aren't going to be able to see it. The text is so small. It says Alberta is currently landlocked by federal policy, bills C-69 and 48, and we have no negotiating leverage with either Ottawa or BC. So we're already landlocked. So anybody who puts that argument forward, the question I always have for people is, well, we're currently in the same situation. So what are we talking about here? Alberta as a nation can control movement of goods across the border, which creates leverage. A landlocked country also cannot be subject to high tariffs or be denied a port or coastal access based on UN agreements. Now, the reason that's important is because anybody who's telling you, well, what about ports? What about access to freighters? What about all these other things? These are deals that can be reached with other countries. And if you think that Canada isn't going to want Alberta's oil and gas, if they were to be independent, that deal would have to go through. There would be a need for those products. Canada can't just turn around and say, you don't have access to tidewater. You don't have access to transport throughout the country. They also aren't allowed to tax. I know that's part of the tariffs, but they're not allowed to tax any transport of materials through Canada if Alberta were to be independent. Up here where it says no pipelines, again, this comes back to, I'll just keep it zoomed in. I know you guys can't see all the text. I'll read it clearly. Bill C-69 and C-48 already ensure there will be no more pipelines built in Canada ever again. Remaining in Confederation will not change this. That's an important fact. Again, because if anybody says, well, you're screwed, you're this, you're that. My argument has always been, if we're screwed, why can't we at least be in charge of our own destiny? If you don't like the way things are, at least you can turn around and say, let's put a plan together to try and make things better. We cannot do that under the federal government. We cannot steer the ship, so to speak. At least then if Alberta goes down, it goes down by its own hand. Not under the watchful guise of the federal government who doesn't care about Alberta. But it says here that no pipelines will ever be built again. Remaining in Confederation will not change this. We would have more leverage as a nation to negotiate this. But leaving Canada means nothing gained, nothing lost on the issue. I agree with that statement because, again, we're already told that's not going to happen being a part of Canada. People have raised the issues with a difficult economy. Again, point 7, we have already experienced and gone through a difficult economy in 2016 when, as a result of bills C-69 and C-48, we saw more than 20 multinational oil and gas companies sell their assets and move their headquarters out of Canada. I've mentioned Husky Energy in one of those videos, alongside a multitude that said Alberta's not profitable anymore. They left. The jobs left with them. It says, fortunately, Alberta has greatly diversified their economy. So again, they're prepared to some extent to cover what would be perceived as a difficult economy. I've, of course, said that if you had an independent nation where taxes were either low or non-existent, again, I think that opens the corridors for more companies to come back, more companies to operate and prosper, at least companies that reside within Canada that pay high taxes to be there. But the currency also, speaking of business, becomes an issue. Again, at point 8, the Alberta Reserve Bank will be incorporated under the Finance Department. The creation of Alberta Mint will be evaluated in relation to 3 currency choices: Canadian currency, US currency, or new currency minted in Alberta. So again, we've talked about this before where people say, well, your dollar is going to collapse overnight. Canada's dollar would collapse. So what are you guys going to do? Well, we still have the option of US currency, or again, our own minted currency. Now, does the own minted currency, again, when you look at the euro, when you look at other things that happened, is that profitable for Alberta? Not necessarily right out of the gate, but that doesn't mean that over time it doesn't get better. Look, there is no easy answer when it comes to Alberta claiming its own independence. There is no magic wand that says as soon as this happens, everything's glorious, everything's amazing, bills are paid, everybody's happy, everyone's rich. There's no point where it's an instant win. What we're talking about is a few years to maybe a decade of building up the province, getting its businesses installed, sorted out, its profits flowing in to cover things like healthcare, to cover better education, to cover more job creation. It doesn't happen overnight. The point of discussing an independent Alberta has nothing to do with instant success and has everything to do with the questions of, is what we're doing currently working for us, and how are we going to look 10 years down the line if things don't change? That is what Albertans are concerned about. If they have the ability to make up, as this document about independence for dummies states, is that at least we would have the right to choose our own path. We would have the right to forge our own path, to get our products to market, to decide what is best for us at our own peril. We wouldn't be limited by a federal government that simply says, no, you're not allowed to move forward. I think this is nothing but good news. I think this answers hopefully a couple of questions. I know a lot of people asked about CPP. A lot of people asked about their passports. Hopefully this provides some clarity. Again, anytime this kind of information comes out, I'll be covering it in our Alberta is Leaving series. Again, I hope to have the members of the Alberta Prosperity Project on the channel in the near future. But let me know what you think down below, folks. When all of this is outlined, when you see the legal aspects of the discussion of Alberta claiming independence, does it sound, if you live in Alberta, does it sound more attractive to you? Does it sound like something you'd be interested in? Or are you still convinced that things could get better within Confederation, with the federal government? Do you believe that we can repair the damage done over the last few decades between Alberta and the federal government? Again, they've never given me a reason to think they're going to change. So I personally sit on the point of no. I don't think there's any fixing this. I think it's a day late and a dollar short, but let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. If it's your first time here, I hope this video's earned your subscription. Again, make sure to hit that subscribe button, click your bell for all notifications so that you're notified each and every time a video drops on this channel. You don't miss a beat. Also, remember to join me live each and every Friday night here on the channel for Friday Night Fringe, our weekly live streaming show where I'm joined by the beautiful Mrs. Fringe as we talk about everything happening in this week in politics, everything we know that's coming up in the week ahead, as well as back and forth within the greatest YouTube community on the platform. I look forward to talking to you guys outside of making these videos each and every week, but most importantly, I look forward to chatting with you this Friday night, starting at 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, here on the channel. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll catch you on the next one.